Fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. It's a real pleasure to host this webinar. My name is Katie Fowler, and I'm the Director of Responsible Business at the Thomson Reuters Foundation. We are home to one of the world's leading platforms that collects data from companies about their workforce throughout their direct operations and their supply chain. And this year, we are very excited to be launching the AI Company Data Initiative, or AI-CDI. And our goal is to build the world's most comprehensive data set, mapping the corporate adoption of AI to drive responsible business practices. We have developed this initiative in partnership with UNESCO. So we're using UNESCO's recommendations on the ethics of AI as a guiding principle, as it was the first ever global standard on ethics, on AI ethics, and it has seen the widest worldwide adoption by 193 of UNESCO's member states. So to bring attention to our launch and the synergies that exist between our datasets on workforce and responsible AI adoption, we'll be discussing AI's impact on labour rights this afternoon. So again, it's so great to see so many people having joined the call, and we really look forward to having this discussion this afternoon. During the event today, we're going to aim to offer useful insight to business leaders who are navigating the complexities of artificial intelligence integration within their organisations. Our primary aim is to showcase the impact AI is already having on workforces, alerting leaders to the urgency of implementing proper oversight and ethical adoption practices. Later on, we're going to hear from our expert panellists, Sonam Jindal, Lead of AI, Labour and the Economy at Partnership on AI, and Richard Wingfield, Director of Technology and Human Rights at BSR. We'd also really like to maximise your involvement too, so I'd really like to encourage you to utilise the Q&A function if you have any questions throughout the session. Please ensure that you do that whenever you have any questions, because we do have a dedicated space towards the end of the session, so we will try our best to get through all of your questions. But first, I'm actually going to hand over to my colleague, Polly Marsh, because we're going to hear a little bit about the current state of AI in the workforce, informed by our data from our Workforce Disclosure Initiative, which, as I've mentioned, is our world-leading sister survey aimed at improving corporate transparency on the workforce. Polly, would you like to run through the data? Thank you.
Yes, great. Thanks so much, Katie. And hello, everyone. Yes, so I'm Polly Marsh. I'm Research and Campaigns Manager. And obviously, as we know, AI's role in the workplace is increasingly significant at the moment, and those companies are under a lot of pressure to invest in AI in order to streamline operations and remain competitive. But alongside that, employees are increasingly concerned about the impact on job role and job security. So to better understand this, we are going to take a quick look through some of the WDI data, because it does have a section which specifically focuses on the automation transition, particularly when it comes to AI in the workplace. So what 2024's data shows us is that while most companies, 77%, were aware of the need to prepare and develop workforce skills for the automation and AI transition, only a quarter were able to actually share any detail of input, like the employee changes actually caused by them. So for example, only 28% were able to provide any data on the number of employees that have been reskilled, redeployed, or had their employment ended because of automation and AI. So that does show quite a concerning gap of oversight when it comes to such a critical area. There was, generally speaking, a lot lower disclosure on topics around automation and AI than other aspects of the survey. And part of the reason for that is that it's fairly new to our survey. We were only starting to ask about it in 2023, but there was a lot of limited data, and that does suggest that companies do have blind spots when it comes to the impact that AI has on their workforce. So last year, only 2 companies were able to report job losses due to automation or AI. And realistically, we would expect the numbers to be higher than that. So I think it does show that kind of HRDD Intuit is failing to pick up on the cases as opposed to them not happening. Also, 4% of companies were able to say what number of employees had been reskilled because of automation, but none no companies at all were able to provide any additional information on what that reskilling entailed. And that is a problem because reskilling, redeploying, and upskilling are basically the most essential tools that we have in making sure that AI adoption happens in a fair way to workers. So training data is incredibly important for that. But what we did see last year is that companies seem to be reducing their focus, or at least their oversight of training. There was a decline in the number of companies sharing training data. So last year, 73% of companies reported measuring the impact of training on job productivity and satisfaction, which is a decline from 76% in 2023 and 83% in 2022. So it is showing a steady decline in an area that's really essential for the AI transition. So that was slightly worrying for us. The WDI data isn't alone. There is a lot of other external data that's backing this up. A 2025 McKinsey report, for example, found that 92% of companies plan to increase AI investment, but only 1% consider their AI deployment to be mature. So that does indicate that there is very much a way to go for companies with the deployment of a fair AI strategy. I think, Rosie, if we could move on to the next slide. Thank you very much. What this shows us is that ultimately companies are lacking the support, guidance, and guardrails needed to implement AI in a safe and secure way that ensures good outcomes for all and maximizes equality. But that is starting to change, and there are becoming some regulations and frameworks on AI that we are seeing around us. That includes national regulation or regional regulation, such as the EU AI Act, which is the world's first comprehensive AI regulation. It defines the roles and responsibilities for all AI stakeholders, ensuring accountability, AI literacy obligations, and aspects like that. It's predicted to have full applicability by August 2026, subject to likely delays, with rules for general purpose AI models beginning in August 2025. If you go now and we look at the US, it has a far more decentralized approach to regulating AI. So the Chips and Science Act of 2022 have highlighted AI as a key technology area for the US in general, and a recent White House executive order has listed key principles for responsible AI development and deployment, and it does have a specific focus on worker protection, so that's reassuring. I would say California is probably the state that leads with AI regulation. It has an AI law for business accountability that's deemed pretty strong, and in May 2024, Colorado enacted a comprehensive AI legislation targeting algorithmic discrimination and high-risk systems. So there is the regulation there, it's just happening in a far more decentralized way. If we look to Asia and look at China, that, on the other hand, takes a very centralized approach to AI development and a very strong stance on regulatory oversight. So its guidance has been pretty quick to reflect new developments. Such examples include a 2023 law regulating generative AI and a 2024 proposal standardizing AI-generated content labeling. Equally, just last month, in Japan, they have established a new AI bill which promotes AI, and it is rolling out a fundamental AI plan that is likely to be implemented within a year. So countries around the world are taking steps to regulate this, and it's not just countries, it's also companies taking the initiative as well. There are multiple frameworks which are being set up as companies come to understand the business case for the correct implementation of AI. So such examples include Microsoft's Responsible Business AI Standard, Google's AI Principles, and IBM's Trusted AI Framework. And then finally, we also need to look at civil society, because they play an incredibly important role in filling the blanks, essentially, of where guidance is lacking. So the OECD AI Principles are the first intergovernment AI standard, adopted originally in 2019 and then updated in 2024. They consist of 5 value-based principles and 5 recommendations, and they offer practical guidance for policymakers and AI stakeholders. The AI Governance Alliance, led by the World Economic Forum, has over 600 members, 500 organizations, and it is essentially promoting responsible AI development and deployment around the world. While the Partnership on AI unites academics, researchers, civil society, AI companies, all together to harness AI's potential, and they are creating tools and recommendations aimed at driving practical and ethical adoption of AI. And of course, Katie has already mentioned AI CDI, which is Thomson Reuters, the Foundation's new initiative, which is a framework assisting business leaders in evaluating their current AI practices, offering insights and benchmarks that guide organizations in adopting responsible and ethical AI policies. So it's really positive to see that these initiatives are popping up. And as I say, it's very important that they are, because companies really, really need to see the impact of AI on their workforce to understand how they can roll it out in a really fair and equal way. So that was just a bit of a run through of our data and where we're at the moment. But I will hand back to Katie to chair the rest of the conversation.
Thank you so much, Polly. That's really, really interesting and really useful context for the next part of the discussion. I'm now going to introduce our 2 expert speakers who are going to help us investigate the impact of AI on labour rights. So Sonam Jindal leads the AI, Labour and Economy team at Partnership on AI, focusing on responsible data supply chains and improving labour conditions behind AI development. Sonam's background in the tech industry also gives her a very multi-dimensional view of this really important subject. And also joined by Richard Wingfield, Director of Technology and Human Rights at BSR. Richard collaborates with tech companies in Europe, the Middle East and Africa to integrate human rights considerations into their operations. And before joining BSR, he led the legal and policy team at Global Partners Digital, focusing on digital technology impacts on human rights. Thank you very, very much to both of you for joining us today. Really, really glad to be able to create this space for you to share your knowledge and perspective with our audience. I am going to kick off by asking you, Sonam, if you don't mind, to help us understand a little bit more about the challenges facing the workforce at the moment, particularly with the new roles and opportunities that are being created across the AI development lifecycle and the supply chain, particularly around what you would call data enrichment work. What are some of the challenges that are facing workers in this area, and why might companies across the life cycle need to be paying attention to these workers and their working conditions?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, first of all, and really excited to have this conversation and learn more from everyone. To give you a little bit of background, and I know Partnership on AI was mentioned a little bit earlier, but within the AI labor and economy work, our portfolio kind of looks at the impact of AI on the labor market, inequality, and the economy. And there are kind of 3 buckets of impacts worth looking at. One is, how is AI transforming existing jobs? The workflows of existing jobs, the experience of workers who are now going to have AI introduced into their workflows. How does it impact the existence of existing jobs in terms of, does it displace jobs? Does it mean that some jobs become redundant? And the third bucket is, how does it transform future work? And this is the part that I've spent a lot of time on in the last couple of years. What are the new roles that are needed to make sure that AI works? And what does that ecosystem look like? There are new jobs that are coming out. Namely, one of the pieces that I think we don't talk about enough is that we need a lot of people to make sure that AI models are accurate. And, in traditional, when we first started training new AI models, that meant we had a lot of data that was unstructured. And in order to make sure that we were coming with data sets that could actually be used to train AI models, that required a lot of human context. So this might be familiar to a lot of people here, but when you have a big, large data set, and you scrape internet data, you have it, the model doesn't necessarily know how to interpret certain things, right? It doesn't necessarily know if you're looking at a cat or a dog. It doesn't know if some content on social media violates that content policy that the company might have set. And so there were millions and millions of humans that were employed to look at that data, make certain assessments using their human judgment to train these AI models. And that process was really embedding human intelligence into these AI models and the underlying data sets. We've seen a big shift recently in order to produce more complex AI models that are useful in settings like healthcare, finance, legal, that you need a lot of additional human context that is locked inside of the minds of experts in oftentimes the companies that want to be using these AI models. And so we have to sort of reevaluate what it looks like to include humans in the process, and also think about this as maybe a new job category. And I think that that's probably the first thing that I think we're not talking about enough is we don't have a model for understanding, is this a job or is this something that is being done on the side? I think historically this was seen as we just need to make sure that the data is cleaner. It doesn't really require a lot of hard work. But anecdotally, what we've seen is that AI researchers really see that if you invest in your relationships with the people who are labeling this data and enriching it and making it legible, that yields higher quality, more reliable AI models. And so I think thinking about how we set workers up for success to do this work going forward is really important, and thinking about how this challenges our understanding of what work is going forward. And particularly, what's the role of people who would be potentially using these AI models to help shape the AI models? In this situation, a lot of the people who are going to be ultimately using these AI models in these various work settings are probably the people who are best positioned to train those models, shape those models for them to be useful in their workflows. And I'm happy to share examples, but I'm recognizing I've been chatting for a bit, so I'll pause there.
Thanks, Sonam. That's super interesting. So do you think that this sort of anecdotal perception that there isn't really a job sitting behind all of these different models, do you think that that's impacting the way that companies perhaps are thinking about the rights of those workers in the supply chain?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the big shift that needs to happen is this is real work, right? I think we are really used to data as data. We can just grab the data and build a model off of it. We can just grab the data and analyze it, and it's okay. But we're realizing that actually, in order to have high quality, reliable models, you really do need a different set of standards and more, a higher level of engagement with the people who are actually doing this work. I think it's, and in certain settings, if you have a high error rate for ChatGPT or Claude or any of these other models on a consumer basis for 20, 30% error rates in certain cases, it might not be the biggest deal. But if you have a 20, 30% error rate for an AI model in the healthcare context, in legal context, that becomes a bigger issue. And the only way to reduce that error rate and have models that are reliable is to make sure that the data and the expertise that are being embedded in those data sets are of a high quality and very reliable. And I think more and more AI labs are realizing that quality is more important almost than quantity in a lot of these places. And so thinking about how do you set people up for success to do this work? And I think we've treated data as like a means to an end in many ways. And I think we need to start thinking about, well, it's constructed, there are people behind it, and what does it look like to make sure that people are able to do a good job in that setting? What support do they need? What communication do they need? What tools do they need in order to make sure that they are able to produce the highest quality data? Is where we should be going.
Thanks, Sonam. That's super interesting. Richard, I just wanted to bring you into the conversation. When we're thinking about how AI will transform the economy and the labour market more broadly, what do you think the range of considerations that companies should be thinking about are, and perhaps what they're not already thinking about enough?
Great, thank you. Yes, well, I want to maybe start answering that question by building on what Sonam was saying, which is that thinking about data and data enrichment workers specifically as part of the company's value chain is really important. So if you're a company that makes physical goods, you will be well aware of the fact that you have supply chains that provide components. Those companies themselves go down into further parts of your supply chain that make smaller components and so forth. And really recognizing that if you are developing or using AI, the people who are doing that job are just as much a part of your value chain as the people who make the individual components that go into a piece of hardware. And so thinking about their working conditions, the potential exposure they may face to harmful content, which is a huge issue in this sector, I think is really critical. So I just want to plus one really to everything that Sonam was saying, and just recognizing that part of the AI value chain is a really important part of this. But then if we think about the way that AI will transform the economy and labor markets more broadly, and there is no doubt that they absolutely will, I think it's really important for companies to think about the short, medium, and long-term impacts that AI is having. The reality is AI is already having impacts upon the economy and the labor market. It's not something that is coming in the future. We know at the moment, I suspect all of us in our roles are beginning to use AI. We're starting to see some of the tasks that we do being done by AI, perhaps not as well as we do, but certainly being done by AI to an extent, or supported by AI. And so really starting to think about, in the short term, what are the parts of roles that we're starting to see go to AI? What are some of the immediate risks that the use of AI is presenting? And that could be everything from risks to personal data and privacy, risks of bias and discrimination when you have algorithmic decision making, risks to human workers in the AI supply chain that we talked about earlier. So really thinking about what's happening right now is critical, and not waiting for the future. At the same time, I do think companies need to think about the long term as well, and that's really difficult. I think one thing that certainly I've learned in the last few years of working in this space, it's very difficult to predict where AI is going to go in the future. What are the products that are really going to take off? What are the impacts going to be? I think a few years ago, many of us in this space would have said, well, actually, it's the lowest skilled workers in society that are most at risk from AI, and the professionals are probably a bit safer. I actually think that that's probably not correct now. And those of us who work in the knowledge economy are probably particularly vulnerable to AI, those of us who work with communications, research, analytics. And so that's an example of the way generative AI has very quickly shifted the impacts that it's having on existing jobs. And so I think for companies thinking about this, it's looking at what are the immediate issues that we're picking up right now, the immediate risks that we're seeing, what are the different ways that AI can go in the future, and how do we start to prepare for them? But recognizing that we probably can't predict with much certainty beyond a year or two what the impacts are really going to be. And so constantly refining your approach and being iterative in your responses is absolutely essential to future-proof your efforts.
Thanks, Richard. That's just to highlight that the shift in prominence of this conversation has shifted with our realization that those people working in the knowledge economy are now those most at risk, rather than the people that perhaps were, furthest away from worry, the low skilled workers that actually we couldn't see. And actually we're all at risk and vulnerable to changes that are going to happen in the economy, and obviously in the socio-political sphere. And so the more that we can be talking about labour rights very broadly across the spectrum of the workforce, the better. And with the shift in how people are contributing value in the broader labour market, what should companies be doing to ensure broader prosperity across society from AI advances? Where do we start with that? Sonam, could I come to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is thinking about workers, right? I think starting with how are we thinking about the worker experience and what role they're going to have in the future. I think it's really important to incorporate their voices and make sure that they have a role in shaping the future version of their work. And I think that there's like a very good business reason to do this as well, right? I don't think that we're going to see the types of productivity gains that AI is promising if workers are not actually adopting these tools, right? There's a version of this like world where AI is transforming our workflows and making it easier for me to do my job, and also then making it very improving my entire experience, right? Maybe I'll have a little bit more free time. Maybe my work is going to be more enjoyable for me. And I think that's sort of the vision that we should be aiming for as well, partially because we need to be able to um, I think through the longer term implications as well. I think that if we replace too fast or we sort of make assumptions about what AI can do, we may also lose a lot of that expertise that has been developed by humans over time and is shared by people. And so I would think about including workers in any process and conversation about how to incorporate AI into their workflows, and what's going to make it easier for them to do. And I think people are really creative as well, right? They know what is going to make their jobs a lot easier because they're best positioned to understand where those inefficiencies are coming from. So if they're a part of the designing process of these AI tools and helping shape how these AI tools are being incorporated into their work, you'll likely see more of these sort of productivity gains and probably more innovation as well, right? I think AI is really good at taking information that is widely available and being able to, understand it better and analyze it. And it's really great for compute. Fantastic. But new insights and innovation, that's coming from humans. So I think they still need to be a part of the conversation. And also thinking about how they should be credited, what sort of like who's getting the benefits from these efficiency gains is extremely important. And so I think we can do more by including them. I think the other piece is that, to Richard's point, like this is moving quite fast, but there's a lot of uncertainty. And so I think it's really important for us to have more honest conversations and maybe not like jump the gun and sort of say, oh, this is solving all of our problems, let's go for it, but being very thoughtful about how we're incorporating it and testing it. And I think the best way for us to do that, as a broader public, is probably to push for more transparency as well. I do think that that's really important for us to have a better understanding of where things are going. And I think starting to then think about the long-term implications, right? I was just chatting with someone who's been an engineer for 15, 20 years, and he can do the work of 10 entry-level engineers on his own. Now, this is fantastic with AI, great. Maybe he doesn't need to hire those 10 engineers, 10, 15 engineers, and he can do a lot more. But what was his process of becoming an engineer that can use AI in that way? He had to kind of go through a training process. So thinking about the long-term implications of, are we training enough people to be that sort of 10x engineer in 15 years? And what happens if we're not training people and providing that entry level step into the industry to enable them to do that and then be really innovative and use these tools very effectively. So I think thinking about the broader ecosystem and the longer term implications of introducing AI into workflows is really important.
Yeah, it's so insightful. I want to come back to your first point there about how potentially we stand to make the greatest positive impact by bringing workers along the journey to AI adoption and having them involved in every step of it. Do you think then there is potentially also a risk of further exacerbating inequality across the workforce, given that the likelihood is that we would be bringing our, high skilled, highly paid sort of knowledge economy workers along the ride with us, but perhaps the low skilled workers who we're furthest away from wouldn't have that same opportunity? Is that a reflection?
Can you repeat the second part of your question one more time?
Well, if we want to bring the workforce along the journey to transition to an AI economy, where are the greatest challenges in ensuring an equitable approach to that? Are the people sitting right next to us going to stand more of a chance of, being on that journey with us than the person, in a totally different country that works in a totally different part of the supply chain?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I think we have to probably start thinking. I'm really curious to hear Richard's thoughts on this as well. But I think starting to think through what the incentives are to participate in sort of this broader economy. Things are going to become, if we want to see sort of AI models produce the greatest level of like efficiency gains or help improve our workflows, that's something that has to be done with the collective, right? And so if you want people to be contributing to that future, also thinking about, well, what are they kind of getting out of it as well, right? So if you want to, I think like the training example is kind of an interesting one, right? If you want to train a model to do a complex sort of healthcare workflow, you need a high level of expertise from someone who is already in that workflow to help make it the most effective. But they should also then share in that, in what comes out of that. It shouldn't be that they are maybe training something that is going to replace them. And so thinking about how we structure the broader economy to make sure that we're getting people to be a part of this future and also benefit from this future is something that I think we should be doing a better job of. And figuring out how to set that up in society, I think is really, really key.
Richard, do you think that there are opportunities here for companies to ensure that the benefits of AI are actually distributed equally across the workforce, or equitably, should I say? I'm not sure equally is a possibility.
I think there are opportunities to, absolutely, but I think it's hard to escape the fact that the types of AI that are being developed are largely driven by a relatively small number of large technology companies. And at the moment, you highlighted regulation earlier, and I think one thing to take away from it is there isn't a huge amount of regulation, and governments are really struggling to keep up with all of the developments in AI and to be able to craft policies that help steer it in the right direction, which I know is something we might come on to into a later question. So in many ways, it might feel quite difficult for an individual company to really feel that it has a significant degree of influence over the kinds of AI that it is able to use and the impacts that it's having on the workforce. But I would reiterate what Sonam has said. There are some really important questions that we need to be having both at a macro level as societies, but also in smaller units as individual countries or companies about what is it ultimately that we want AI to do for us. We don't want to live in a world where AI takes all of the great things that we enjoy in life and leaves us with everything else that we don't want to do. We don't want AI that leaves hundreds of thousands or millions of people unemployed. As Sonam hinted at earlier, there is the potential for the efficiencies for AI to give us more free time or more free space to do other things in life as well, and to reevaluate what work looks like in a world where AI and technology can do a lot of what humans had to do in the past. So although those are really big questions, there's no reason why companies should not be looking at them themselves and should not be bringing in workers, whether that's trade unions or other representative groups, and really challenging those questions of what is it that AI can do? What is it we want us to do? And how do we create a working environment, at least at our single company, where everyone has benefited from AI. But I think your point, Katie, about really thinking about the different voices and perspectives in that is absolutely critical. At the moment, the majority of discourse around AI is still dominated in the global north and by a certain, small number of actors. And often the people that Sonam and I were talking about, who are the data enrichment workers, their voices are very rarely heard when we talk about what a good society looks like that uses AI. So I do think we need to put in a lot of effort to make sure that those voices in different parts of the value chain, who may not be so familiar with AI, but nonetheless will be affected in it, that companies do think about ways to bring those voices in as well.
Super interesting. Richard, just a follow-up question, really. I'm wondering, in your work intersecting with lots of businesses who are obviously rolling out AI strategies at the moment, what would you say are some of the most crucial indicators that companies can keep their eye on in terms of understanding how AI is actually impacting their workforce?
So I think one metric and actually the sort of is almost foundation to a lot of this, and which hopefully the work that you're doing will shed light on, is just where are they using AI at all? I think would be helpful. At the moment, a lot of companies are using it in a range of different ways, everything from HR to internal efficiencies to content creation. Very few companies have really even audited all of the different ways that they're using AI within the company, particularly larger companies, and thinking about the impacts that it has on different teams. So number one, just audit what you're doing in the first place. I think secondly, it's really difficult to get really good quantitative metrics aside from things like number of jobs, number of roles, number of hours spent doing a certain thing. But I think really getting qualitatively into people's experience of work, how they're finding AI is affecting them, what that means for the sort of job satisfaction, what it means for work-life balance, where it may be creating additional stresses. There might even be in instances where, for example, you have more digitally literate people feeling much more comfortable in using AI to great advantage and others less so. And so I think looking not just at the qualitative metrics of, as I said, number of jobs, hours spent, efficiencies made and the rest of it, but people's own self-reflections on the impact that it's having on their job, on those different metrics of well-being within the workplace are also really critical as well. So it's a combination of a number of different metrics.
Thanks, Richard, so much. Sonam, did you want to add anything?
I saw a similar question in the chat as well, and I just linked the guidelines that we have for AI and shared prosperity that two of my colleagues wrote a little while ago, which has signals for both opportunities and risks for AI being introduced into various workflows and the impact on workers and the labor market. So I'd refer people to that paper. And if you're interested in sort of piloting any parts of this, please do reach out.
Thank you so much. We'll make sure that goes into the open chat for all of the audience to see. I know that was just responded to one particular question at the moment, but that's fantastic. I also have a couple of other questions from the audience, which I'll bring to your attention now. So firstly, do you think water consumption associated with AI will increasingly become a topic of conversation for companies utilizing AI? And that ever becomes more a focus? And if that ever becomes more of a focus, do you think companies will address the water consumption issue, the more crucial response factor? Richard, shall I come to you on that?
A short answer is yes. I mean, there's no doubt that the data centers that are required for AI to be effective require huge amounts of water to keep them cool. And we're already seeing the impacts that that's having on nature in the areas. Obviously, it impacts not only the water supply, but it will also impact upon things like biodiversity within the regions where that's occurring. And the level of water consumption, unless there's some radical change in its efficiency, will only increase as time goes on, and it will be an increasingly large proportion of countries' water supplies. So I think companies do need to really factor that in. And what I have seen so far working with many companies is that while their human rights teams or their teams that think about impacts on people are very much recognizing the impacts on AI, there's not quite so much of a connection with the work that the climate and nature teams within company sustainability teams have at the moment. There's definitely an emerging understanding of the impacts. And I think that the really critical thing that companies need to do is to start integrating AI considerations into their climate and nature strategies. Governments will also need to be thinking about this as well, particularly if they are looking to encourage data centers or they're trying to encourage AI innovators in their country. Governments will need to be having policy measures developed to think about the impacts that will have on water supply as well. So short answer is yes.
Thanks, Richard. I would also add that the Foundation's AI Company Data Initiative is reaching out to companies to ask whether they are measuring their water consumption through their AI adoption journey. So we will have some data on that after the disclosure window. Sonam?
Yeah, I mean, I maybe have a bit of a follow-up question for Richard. I think you're getting at a really interesting point here about like organizational structure within companies, like where does change come from? And I think there's maybe two questions a little bit for everyone to reflect on and maybe, the audience members as well. I think one is, are like supply chain issues that come from AI development being handled materially differently than traditional supply chain issues within the same company. So a lot of companies who are building AI, they have traditional sort of supply chain practices and dealing with different vendors, et cetera, that are quite complex. Are those infrastructures sufficient to handle the issues that are coming from challenges across the AI supply chain, both in the impact on like the physical supply chain and sort of like the labor side of this as well? And I guess that probably, what advice do we have, I guess, for sort of bridging the gap, and why might that be a little bit more challenging in this situation? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good question because as I said, in some ways there are parallels between data enrichment workers at the very, the top end of your supply chain and the people who do mineral extraction or who are at the other end of another supply chain for another type of company. But we have over a number of decades, I think at this point, really developed quite sophisticated standards, inspection methods, assessment metrics, and initiatives specifically around workers' rights in vulnerable parts of the supply chain. And those cannot be easily translated to those who work in the data supply chain for a few reasons. One, most obviously, it's very difficult to go and physically inspect a person who is doing data enrichment. Many of them are working from home. And so there's just a difference in physicality. Most companies have tried to map their supply chains when it comes to the physical part of the supply chain, at least the first couple of tiers. I don't think companies are really challenging their own suppliers of data or foundational models as to where they're getting their data from and who's enriching it. So I think there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done there. And I know that that's something that sort of Partnership on AI has looked at. And so although you asked me the question, I'd also welcome your own thoughts. But I think a very simple thing that companies can start to do, whether they are developing their own AI systems or they're purchasing them, is start to ask these questions from their suppliers as part of their broader procurement processes. So in the same way that you would ask about working conditions if you're getting physical components, I would be asking questions about the role, if any, of data enrichment workers when you're purchasing data or you're purchasing foundation models, or you're working with an AI developer to develop your own models and systems. So I think transparency, just starting to ask those questions, is the first step, but there's a lot more that we would need to do. But throwing the question back to you, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is bringing this, part of what makes the maybe AI development life cycle a little bit difficult maybe at this time, or maybe overall, is that some of the decisions that are being made are being maybe considered as research decisions. And so it's a matter of like, where are the decisions happening? And are they under the purview of people who have very developed mechanisms and standards and auditing processes to understand what the impact might be of those decisions? Because the methodology exists, right? And I think the methodology for managing supply chain risks has been something that people have been working on, as you know, for 20, 30 years, right? Even within the same companies. But they weren't necessarily seeing this maybe as a part of their scope, or they didn't know to include this in their scope. And so it's sort of like a question of bridging the gap between people who are making decisions right now and people who maybe should be making some of those decisions and leveraging some of the learnings from other fields and sort of doing that. I think the other piece is like the competition amongst AI companies and the speed at which things are going. One thought might be, is that playing a factor in sort of maybe not having all the conversations that need to happen? And what is the role of others in the ecosystem in pushing for that? And this is where I think that customers of foundation model companies and investors and the broader ecosystem can change the decision-making calculus of the AI developing companies, because there are other like you can look at the supply chain in a longer way, right? So what can enterprise users who are saying, oh, you want me to buy this model so that I can use it in my workforce? I have some questions before I make this sale, and force the companies to reevaluate how they're making these development decisions. And so I think there's a role to be played by the buyers and investors and others in the broader ecosystem in helping shape the decision-making calculus for the foundation model companies.
Thank you for bringing that perspective too, Sonam. I mean, the importance of responsible procurement and adoption here is as important a conversation as it is for AI developers. So there's a lot that companies in any industry can do, because there is absolutely no argument to be made that any industry is free of looking at AI to advance their operational efficiencies at the moment, at the very least. So I'm going to bring the session to a close. I'm going to ask one more question from the audience, and then we'll do a bit of a wrap up by asking you both, Sonam, Richard, for your some of your takeaways around regulation. How do you think that companies should be looking to change and evolve their learning and training to better prepare their workers for the AI transition? Richard, can I come to you for that question?
Yeah, I mean, I would say for sort of not to avoid giving it a full answer to that one, but there is also a real responsibility of other actors when it comes to skills and training. People will not only move roles and change roles within an existing company, but they will move around different jobs in different companies or other employees in their lifetime. And I think there's a real need for governments in particular to make sure that their workforces are continually skilled or supported to reskill when it comes to the impacts that AI will have on all of our jobs. When it comes to individual companies, though, and what they can do, I mean, I think, yes, it's absolutely critical that they look to retrain and reskill their workforce as much as possible. But to go back to Sonam's point, as difficult as it is in some ways to predict the way a company is going to be using AI in 4 or 5 years, that doesn't mean that they can't develop an ongoing dialogue right now with their workforce as to what the plans might be, as to what options are being considered, looking at new kind of tools and products that are being developed that might impact that particular company in the near future. And so even if you're not able to kind of predict in 5-10 years what skills people will need, maintaining an ongoing dialogue so that those issues can be quickly picked up and you hear from the workforce as to what they want and what they need in terms of being able to keep up to date with AI developments is absolutely critical. And to go back to a point that I was making earlier, it's not just about being able to continually keep up to date with the latest AI systems and tools, but recognizing that even right now, there are very different rates of digital literacy. And so, you know, your average 21-year-old going into the workforce is going to be pretty comfortable using ChatGPT and other generative AI tools. Employees who are further along in their career and perhaps haven't grown up using some of those tools are far less likely to. And so recognizing that even right now, there may be differences in terms of the way people can use AI or benefit from it is something that companies should be looking at right now, as well as thinking about future retraining and reskilling.
Absolutely. And we've got some other questions coming in about the implications for freelance and gig economy workers, for example, not benefiting from sort of structured company retraining or upskilling, etc. And then just to also bring some light and positivity to the end of our webinar, I wondered, Sonam, if you could describe perhaps the opportunity that we have to ensure that the AI transition actually positively benefits the workforce.
I'll do my best.
Go on, you can do it. You can do it.
I mean, I think we are starting to like I think the thing that's making me really optimistic in the last like 6 months to a year maybe is that the labor implications of AI are coming into the forefront. I think there are more conversations on this that are entering the mainstream, and I think people are genuinely worried and upset about what's happening, and what could be happening, right? I think the reality is that these AI models, in my opinion, are not going to yield the types of returns that the companies are hoping or promising if workers are not included in the process, if they are not benefiting from this, if they are not shaping these models, there won't be the types of adoption. It is totally fine for consumer, a casual search and very useful and very helpful. And it is being very helpful to workers right now and how workers are incorporating it, but they know best what is going to actually help them with their work. And I think that we are kind of going to be quite limited in unlocking AI's full potential if workers are not included in that process. And so I think that what's happening right now and the conversation that's starting presents a good opportunity for us to have that conversation and start innovating and start having the conversations of, okay, well, what does it look like to build this future, right? And how should workers be included? And so, I mean, I think the other piece, someone asked a question about trade unionism and like the existing infrastructure we have. There's more work being done there as well. There are great organizations and unions that are starting to come together on this piece. The ILO has been doing really great work, and I do think that they are well positioned to help shape this dialogue. So I think more of us probably need to raise these conversations, especially for folks in the companies, to start thinking about what this looks like and not just sort of the short-term promises or believing some of the marketing campaigns, but like really functionally, what does this actually look like and what's the future that we want? But the first step is acknowledging that this is a risk and sort of having the conversation. So I'm excited that we're starting to talk about this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So my sort of closing question to you both is just in relation to the policy landscape or lack thereof. And I'm wondering whether you see there to be a specific critical policy or regulation that is really, really needed in order to address the challenges and opportunities presented by AI in the workforce. Richard, I'll come to you first.
I think what's been really interesting about the development of policy in AI is that at the moment, if you look at the existing regulations and policies that governments have come up with, they're either very limited on the consumer-facing impacts of AI systems, and the AI Act in the EU is a good example of that as well, or they are focused on how do we as a country encourage as much innovation and economic investment when it comes to AI in our society. So most governmental AI plans really focus in a quite limited way on those two issues, and maybe something around, you know, impacts on the workforce in terms of job displacement. I think we need to be having a much bigger question within societies as to what do we want a world with AI to look like? Is it a world where, for example, we all work less because actually AI is taking away a lot of the things that we traditionally have needed humans to do? And then how do you create policies to make sure everybody benefits from that equally? I think my worry a little bit, that's the kind of policy thinking that I would like to see that goes aside risk. What I would worry about in some ways, and would be curious to hear Sonam's thoughts on this as well, is a society where we, you know, focus so much on innovation that AI takes away all of the things that we like doing as humans, takes away all of the creativity, takes away some of the things in the jobs that people really enjoy because they can be done more efficiently, and leaves us essentially as just constantly just monitoring AI systems in our jobs. So that doesn't answer your question directly. I would love a lot more thinking about policy on AI to be that big question of what does a really good society look like that takes advantage of the opportunities that Sonam has presented, and how do we create that in a way that everyone benefits from? And I don't think I've seen that yet from any major stakeholder, at least from a governmental one yet.
Thanks, Sonam. Same question to you.
Richard's answer is a pretty good one. So it's tough to follow, but I think also maybe piggybacking off of a earlier comment that Richard made was around concentration. And I think that we should probably see a little bit more policy action around explicitly making the process of AI development a little bit more democratic, right? How do we unlock more people, more organizations to build and innovate, right? And be a part of this ecosystem. Right now, everything is quite concentrated. The data infrastructure is concentrated, and a few companies are sort of at the top of the chain who are shaping what AI is going to look like. And I think that that's fairly limiting. I think it would be useful to figure out what it takes to build an ecosystem where more people are able to build off of public investments in the data infrastructure that is being built, and figure out how to enable people to build solutions that are actually useful for them. Right. I think that right now things are a little bit kept, and not everyone is able to sort of imagine what this future looks like. And one way to enable more people to partake is to sort of make this a more competitive market and give more people the ability to actually build AI tools and be a part of it. And I think that then we will see more innovation. We will see more interesting use cases, more useful AI models for different settings. And I think that that's ultimately going to help companies get the types of results that they would want to have from this type of computational power.
Fantastic. I'm going to draw our conversation to a close. Thank you very, very much to everyone for joining. Some of the biggest takeaways for me were this is real work that is happening, and the acknowledgement that there are workers working in roles that we hadn't even imagined 10 years ago, that we really need to start ensuring that we're able to protect their rights. The rise of vulnerability of the knowledge economy, the importance of companies being able to look not just at the short term, but at the medium and the long term implications, the necessity that we have to bring the workforce on the journey on AI adoption that is going to lead us to the greatest success. But also the huge risk that we have in driving more global inequality around workers' rights through the AI value chain. And I also really just wanted to reiterate the power of the consumer. Every single company is procuring AI, and they have the power to be asking questions through their procurement policy around responsible practices of their suppliers. So please do that. And this is my opportunity to unashamedly plug again the Thomson Reuters Foundation brand new initiative, the AI Company Data Initiative, which will be launching this year. Our disclosure window is open in July, and we are really excited to have the widest amount of adoption from the broadest range of companies. So if you're big or small, working in any industry, looking at corporate adoption of AI, and would like to use our incredibly simple questionnaire as a framework to govern your responsible AI practice, please do get in touch with us. You can follow a link to our website, and you can get in touch directly with our company engagement manager, Rosie McKenzie, who I'd also like to thank for doing a lot of arranging of this brilliant webinar. And just last but definitely not least, thank you so much to Richard and to Sonam for the really, really brilliant conversation today. I don't think we've actually been able to get through all of the questions because they were coming in thick and fast. But again, if you'd like to reach out directly to us, we can put you in touch directly with Sonam and Richard, and they'll be able to answer your questions and, of course, offer you any additional guidance as you may need. So we are going to wrap up with 2 minutes to go. Thank you very much again for all of your attention, and yeah, we look forward to hearing from you.